Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archaeoviking. And happy Native American Heritage Month. In honor of Native American Heritage Month, I'm going to do a video on one, a Native American civilization, but also two, another video in my series on early colonial debacles that disprove the myth of inherent European superiority. This will actually be the first of several videos I'm doing within the next couple of months on Native American civilizations. So look forward to that. And I think that's very important because Native American history and heritage isn't just within a single month, i.e., this month of November. It's all history, just like all African American history is all history, all Mexican American, etc., etc., etc. So with that in mind, the subject of today's video is a history of the Aztec-Spanish War. Now, right off the bat, I'm sure everyone watching this is very familiar with the Aztec Empire, or at least what is most commonly called the Aztec Empire. We'll get into that in a little bit, but very familiar with the Aztec Empire, as well as probably just as equally familiar with the Spanish Empire, maybe to a lesser degree than the Aztec Empire, but it's still a fairly well-known empire uh, in the general public mind. Now, that being said, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about the Spanish Empire and its conquest of the Aztec Empire. Um, a lot of myths involving, again, the myth of the inherent superiority of Europeans, of white Europeans specifically, things involving human sacrifice, etc., etc., etc. And on top of that, while we know a lot about these empires, a lot of the detail of the rise of both the Aztec Empire, again, that's not necessarily its correct name. We'll get into that in a little bit, but the rise of the Aztec Empire and also the rise of the Spanish Empire. So, with that in mind, this video is going to tackle one as closely as possible, is going to tackle the accurate history of the Aztec-Spanish War, uh, as well as it's going to tackle the various myths involved with and related to the Aztec-Spanish War. So with that in mind, first we need to do this ahead of time because it's going to be an in-depth video, and that is there is a trigger warning because disturbing subject matter involving death and enslavement will and human sacrifice, etc., will most certainly be discussed in this video, and I will not always have time during the video to do another trigger warning. So be forewarned, again, trigger warning, disturbing subject matter involving death and enslavement will be discussed in the video. All right, now that brings us to our first section of the video, the Aztec Triple Alliance. So, the history of the Aztec Triple Alliance really begins with the migration of nomadic Nahua speaking peoples into the Valley of Mexico between 1200 to 1325 CE. They specifically migrated somewhere from northern Mexico around what is called Arito America and Oasis America. Arito America being in northwestern Mexico and northeastern Mexico and parts of the sort of central, southern, central, southwestern parts of the United States, and then Oasis America being in northwestern Mexico along with Arito America, as well as in parts of the American Southwest. Uh, and you can see here in this map here sort of the uh, synthesis and eventual migration of the Nahua speaking peoples, or at least the Nahua language as we know it. Eventually, the Mexica, the last Nahua-speaking peoples to migrate into the Valley of Mexico, would establish the city of Tenochtitlan on Lake Texcoco. It's debated when they did this. Some say 1325 CE, others say 1345 CE. So somewhere between 1325 and 1345 CE. And real quick, you'll notice that I did not pronounce Texcoco as well as Nawa necessarily the way it is spelled. I'm pronouncing it phonetically. I'm pronouncing it in the actual Nawa pronunciations, at least as close as possible. And that's going to be the pattern for this video when it comes to Mesoamerican uh, and Nawa names and words. I'm sure I will not necessarily do that perfectly, and I apologize to any Nawa peoples who are watching this video ahead of time. All right, so then after the founding of Tenochtitlan, the city of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, this is an alternate spelling of Texcoco, Tlacopan, and Tlacopan would establish an alliance known as the Triple Alliance, with Tenochtitlan as the senior partner of the alliance. And here's a map of all three of those cities, Tenochtitlan, Tlacopan, and Texcoco. Then between 1427 and 1519 CE, the Triple Alliance would expand into much of what is now modern day Mexico, which you can see here. Um, over the course of about 80 years, give or take, starting with Itzcoatl, the founder of Tenochtitlan and the Triple Alliance, and going through multiple rulers, including Moctezuma the First, and then the more famous Moctezuma the Second of the Aztec-Spanish War. Now, one thing that needs to be pointed out, while it is often described as an empire, the Triple Alliance is not an empire in the traditional sense. Rather, the Triple Alliance is a hegemonic power made up of semi-independent tributary states who are allowed to govern themselves as long as they provide regular tribute such as warriors for war, precious feathers or jaguar pelts, and prisoners of war for sacrifice. And here is a map sort of showing that layout, with the green being the tributary provinces, the yellow being the various rival kingdoms, uh, and this area right here being the sort of heart of the Triple Alliance around Lake Texcoco here. Uh, and here's actually some examples of some of the tribute lists from the Triple Alliance. And you can see this here, like you see on these lists, cloths and feathers. These represent warriors. Um, these represent cloth, feathers, food, weapons, etc., etc. Jaguar pelts, basically anything you can name it. Here's jaguar pelts again, and feathers. Very much anything on a tribute list in the Triple Alliance was something that was valued as tribute by the Triple Alliance and therefore was valuable to their economy. Then between 1325 or 1345, again, depending on when you set the founding of Tenochtitlan, and 1521 CE, Tenochtitlan's population would rise to between 60,000 and 100,000 inhabitants. This would make it the largest city in North America and one of the largest cities in the world. Now this brings us to our next section, the military of the Aztec Triple Alliance. So, for one thing, warfare was most certainly an integral part of society in the Triple Alliance, with every man being trained to fight and being bound to military service. From birth, miniature weapons were pressed into the hands of boys, and their umbilical cords were buried on the battlefield by the experienced warriors of their district. Most boys, with the exception of elites, were educated in the Lepochkali, apologies again if I butchered that, or House of Warriors, and through their dedication to the warrior school, these boys became the possessions of Tishkat-Lipoka, or Smoking Mirror, a deity who, among other duties, was considered the patron deity of warriors. Women and girls were viewed as equally important in warfare, where Tenochtitlan society was actually based on a parallel complementary model of gender in which men and women would fulfill discrete, quite different roles, which were believed to be equally essential for their society's prosperity. Only women could maintain the cosmic balance and secure divine favor, which would ensure military success. In contrast to a boy's umbilical cord, a girl's umbilical cord would be buried by the hearth, representing the woman's connection to the domestic sphere and their connection to Hui Hui Teot, a deity in large part responsible for the balance of the world. While men would fight physical enemies on the battlefield, women fought the forces of the universe on a metaphysical one, attempting to ensure the necessary cosmological equilibrium and secure divine favor that would allow their husbands to triumph. The broom, among other things, acted as the housewife's defense against invading dirt and disorder, as well as peripheral forces, similar to the physical enemies of the state that warriors battled. This was important as the household was viewed as a microcosm of the cosmos nested within the sphere of the city, which also mirrored both home and universe. Warfare in the Triple Alliance and Mesoamerica as a whole was not based on conquest, domination, or colonization. Instead, it was largely based on extracting some form of tribute from a rival city or conducted for obtaining captives for human sacrifice. The war leaders of the Triple Alliance were the Latawani, the ruler of Tenochtitlan, the general, the Lakat Tekot, the cutter of men, the high general, the Lakoch, Lakoch Calcut, the Lakoch Calcut, are the man from the House of Darts. And then there were other ranks in descending order of status, which included the warrior societies, commoners who had taken captives known as Latmani, uh, and then regular commoners, Yao Keys Kwe, and then sergeants of use known as Tel Poch Wa Kwe. Or youth leaders. And then there were porters who carried weapons known as La Me Me. And again, I apologize if I butchered any of that. In battles with Mesoamerican armies, warriors of the Triple Alliance would focus on capturing prisoners of war rather than killing enemies. This was done by means of cutting an enemy warrior's hamstring. Later, the warriors of the Triple Alliance would abandon these tactics in battles with the Spanish Empire and adapt their tactics to include killing enemies in battle. Feigned retreats and ambushes were common tactics used by warriors of the Triple Alliance, and warfare was usually conducted in the dry season from late autumn to early spring, roughly December to April. Prior to mobilizing an army, the Triple Alliance would send in spies known as Quimichtin, or mice, into an area to gather information on enemy fortifications, armies, and plans. They also sought out dissidents in enemy territory and paid them for information. Due to the danger inherent in their work, they were amply compensated. Merchants also acted as spies for the Triple Alliance, as they often traveled to other Mesoamerican kingdoms for trade. Ambassadors were sent to cities the Triple Alliance planned to attack. The ambassador offered the city the protection of Tenochtitlan and asked the city for tribute. If, after 20 days, the city refused, the Triple Alliance would attack the city. Messengers would relay messages to armies in the field and request for reinforcements to tributary cities. They would also inform tributary cities of the incoming army and their food needs. They would carry messages between two opposing armies and deliver news back to Tenochtitlan about the outcome of the war. The Triple Alliance would also build fortifications and garrisons near the borders of its enemies, such as the Pure Pecha state and the Tlaxcala state. Again, apologies for butchering that. Canoes were used to battle enemy forces on lakes, rivers, and the ocean coast. Rulers of the Triple Alliance and other Mesoamerican cities occasionally enacted coronation campaigns. These were campaigns where the Tlatoani, or ruler of a city, such as Tenochtitlan, would conduct a military campaign to obtain captives for his coronation and to show his ability as a warrior. On top of this, the Triple Alliance and other Mesoamerican cities, such as the Tlaxcalan state and the Purépecha state, also known as the Tarascan state, but Purépecha is the correct term, would occasionally enact predetermined battles known as Xochitl-Huautli, or Flower Wars. These battles involved armies of equal size, meeting at a predetermined location to battle each other, and these battles were largely ceremonial and were generally meant to allow rival cities to show off their power without directly attacking each other's city. The Triple Alliance would often send a far smaller percentage of their total forces than their opponents, making Yao Yots or Flower Wars less damaging for both parties involved. Furthermore, Flower Wars allowed the Triple Alliance to capture prisoners for sacrifice. And then finally, the size of the army of the Triple Alliance varied considerably depending on the conflict, from small contingents of a few thousand warriors to large armies with tens to hundreds of thousands of warriors. And here's all the sources that I got this information from. Uh, and on top of that, it's important to note that the army of the Triple Alliance consisted of multiple warrior societies, where warriors were inducted into increasingly prestigious societies, uh, and gained increasingly better weapons and armor based on the number of prisoners they had captured. The highest ranked warrior societies wore suits of honor called La Huitzli. And here's a Triple Alliance Codis sort of showing that progression, where you can see there's a warrior taking a captive here, and then he gets a little bit better armor here, and then here and here, and you see the progression on and on and on. Among the warrior societies were the fairly famous Eagle and Jaguar warriors, which you can see here and here. However, the most elite warriors in the Triple Alliance were the Qua Chichque, or the Shorn ones. Their heads were shaved apart from a long braid over their left ear. Their bald heads and faces were painted one half blue and another half either red or yellow. And then they wore yellow La Huitzli suits of honor and served as shock troops and took on special tasks as well as battlefield assistance roles when needed. They reportedly swore not to take a step backward during a battle on pain of death at the hands of their comrades. And now we need to take a look at some of the weapons of the Triple Alliance. So the most famous weapon of the Triple Alliance is the Maquis, a sword made from a combination of a wooden paddle, which you can see here, and embedded obsidian knives. Reportedly, according to Spanish sources, these could decapitate horses. I don't know how true that is, and also I don't know how one would even go about testing that. Maybe with, I guess, ballistic gel, but regardless, even if that's not true, these were still formidable weapons to come up against. They also used various spears with obsidian blades embedded in them, various axes. They made use of the atlat to fling atlat darts, essentially very long arrows, not quite as long as, say, spears, but they could still get pretty long. They also made use of bows to great effect and made use of slings to great effect. And in terms of armor, they wore a variety of different types of cotton armor, which you can see here and here. And they also used a variety of shields, seen here, and had a variety of helmets designed after various animals and other creatures throughout Mesoamerica. Now, again, similar to the mock wheat, reportedly the cotton armor of Mesoamerica could stop to a certain degree arquebus and musket balls. I don't know how much that is true, and I don't know if anybody's tested that. If somebody has, that would be great to hear because if that's true, that's a pretty cool fact to know. And the Triple Alliance also used to great effect, as we'll discuss actually later in the video, canoes to conduct battle on, as we mentioned earlier in the video as well, to conduct battle on rivers, lakes, and the ocean coast. All right, now this brings us to our next section. Um, the myths and facts of human sacrifice in the Aztec Triple Alliance, which is, I would argue, the most famous uh, thing that people know about the Triple Alliance and the Aztec Empire, as well as Mesoamerican society as a whole. So, with that in mind, it is important to note that yes, human sacrifice was certainly important to the Triple Alliance and other Mesoamerican societies. And this was built on the belief that human blood fed the gods, and therefore, because the gods would feed humanity, humans too should feed the gods. Despite this, however, despite popular belief resulting from Spanish accounts of conquistadors, the Triple Alliance did not sacrifice hundreds of thousands of peoples over the course of a day or just a few days. In fact, most scholars believe between 1,000 to maybe 20,000 individuals at most were sacrificed annually, based on archaeological evidence and estimates of the population of the Triple Alliance and Mesoamerica as a whole. And I believe it's actually most scholars think it's towards the lower end. Um, Maybe not necessarily 1,000, but probably somewhere in that range. And then also, it is important to note that most human sacrifice in the Triple Alliance and Mesoamerica was non-lethal, specifically auto-sacrifice or self-sacrifice. Uh, in the form of bloodletting by cutting body parts such as the ear and flinging blood in the four cardinal directions to as offerings to the gods. And then regarding lethal human sacrifice, most were prisoners of war captured by Tenochtitlan, Tlacopan, or Texcoco themselves, or provided as tribute by tributary states. Others were citizens of Tenochtitlan, Tlacopan, or Texcoco who willingly offered themselves to the gods, and this was actually considered a great honor and was not available to everyone. Also, yes, archaeologists have found carved stone altars, thousands of ritual knives, and human skulls under the Great Temple in Tenochtitlan. However, the ritual knives show no evidence of use and were likely deposited as offerings themselves. And furthermore, human skulls are far outnumbered by two-dimensional carved skulls. These findings alone attest to the fact that the number of people described to have been sacrificed by the Spanish conquistadors is greatly exaggerated. And here are the sources that I got this information from. All right, now this brings us to our next section, the rise and expansion of the Spanish Empire. So, to really see the rise of the Spanish Empire, we need to go back a lot further in time than even the uh, Aztec Triple Alliance, going back to the uh, conquest of the Iberian Peninsula by the Islamic Umayyad Caliphate in the 700s CE, who would conquer all but this little sliver of the Iberian Peninsula in the 700s CE. And this was part of the larger Islamic conquest from the uh, 600s to the 800s CE, which you can see here on this map. Eventually, the Umayyad Caliphate would establish the Emirate of Cordoba in 1756 on the Iberian Peninsula, again, leaving this tiny little area known as the Kingdom of Asturias, which is a Christian kingdom, and the remnants of the Visigothic Kingdom of Spain, just right here. And eventually the Emirate of Cordova would be succeeded by the Berber Almoravid Empire in the 1050 CE, and eventually the Almoravid Empire would be succeeded by the Almohad Caliphate in 1121 CE. See, and here's the Almoravid Empire and the Almohad Caliphate. Between 750 and 1492 CE, the Christian kingdoms of the Iberian Peninsula would gradually expand and retake the peninsula in what became known as the Reconquista. And you can see sort of that gradual expansion on this map here, with Granada being the last Muslim kingdom in Spain to be conquered by the Christian Spanish kingdoms. Uh, while all this was going on, the Kingdom of Castile would colonize the Canary Islands between 1402 and then eventually ending this colonization in 1496 CE. During this, the Kingdom of Castile and eventually the subsequent unified Spanish Empire would brutally massacre, enslave, and forcibly assimilate the indigenous Guanche peoples of the Canary Islands. Then, on October 18th, 1469 CE, Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabel I of Castile would marry and become co-rulers of each other's kingdom. This is largely viewed as the creation of a unified Spain. However, on paper, Aragon and Castile were still separate kingdoms for a couple of centuries. Then, on September 4th, 1479 CE, the Kingdom of Portugal and the joint kingdoms of Aragon and Castile would sign the Treaty of Aclacovas. As a result of this treaty, the Portuguese Empire and the Spanish Empire would begin dividing much of the world amongst themselves. Eventually, from 1492 to 1519 CE, the Iberian Peninsula would be divided between the kingdoms of Portugal, Aragon, and Castile-Leon, which you can see here. Also, Navarre for a little bit, but after a little while, Castile and Aragon would together retake Navarre. Sorry, not retake, would together conquer Navarre and absorb it into their kingdoms. Then, between 1492 and 1519 CE, the Spanish Empire would begin to colonize the Caribbean islands and the Isthmus of Panama. And then on May 4th, 1493 CE, Pope Alexander VI would issue the Doctrine of Discovery, with the doctrine stating that any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered, and claimed and exploited by Christian rulers. And the doctrine declared that, quote, the Catholic faith and Christian religion be exalted and be everywhere increased and spread, that the health of souls be cared for, sure, whatever you say, and that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. Then, between 1500 and 1530, Spanish cities such as Toledo and Madrid would begin to have populations as high as 20,000 to 30,000 inhabitants. I do want to say right here, note the stark difference in populations between Spanish cities and Tenochtitlan during the same time period. That I think that is an important thing to point out. Then, under the doctrine of discovery, as they colonized the Caribbean and the Isthmus of Panama and eventually other parts of the Americas and the world itself, the Spanish Empire would brutally massacre and enslave tens of thousands of Native American peoples. Michel de Cueno describes the brutality of the Spanish colonization of the Caribbean in a letter to his friend Guillermo Anari, which he sent to Anari on October 28th, 1495 CE, stating that, quote, we captured that canoe with all the men, and one Carib was wounded by a spear in such a way that we thought he was dead, and cast him for dead in the sea, but instantly saw him swim. In doing so, we caught him with the grapple hauled over the bulwarks of the ship, where we cut his head with an axe. The other Caribs, together with those slaves, we later sent to Spain. While I was in the boat, I captured a very beautiful Carib woman whom the said Lord Admiral, which is Christopher Columbus, gave to me, and with whom, having taken her into my cabin, she being naked according to their custom, I conceived desires to take pleasure. I wanted to put my desire into execution, but she did not want it, and treated me with fingernails in such a manner that I wished I had never begun. But seeing that, to tell you the end of it all, I took a rope and thrashed her well, for which she raised such unheard screams that you would not have believed your ears. Finally, we came to an agreement in such a manner that I can tell you that she seemed to have been brought up in a school of harlots. I'm just going to leave that there. I don't think I need to explain why that is horrific. But here's that source that I got this information from. And then we also have the accounts of from Bartolome Las Casas, who critiqued the brutality of the Spanish colonization of the Caribbean in his short history of the destruction of the Indies, where in one account Las Casas describes the colonization of the island of Hispaniola, stating that, quote, "It all began with the Europeans taking native women and children both as servants and to satisfy their own base appetites. Then, not content with what the local people offered them of their own free will, and all offered as much as they could spare, they started taking for themselves the food the natives contrived to produce by the sweat of their brow, which was in all honesty little enough. Since what a European will consume in a single day normally supports three native households of 10 persons each for a whole month, and since the newcomers began to subject the locals to other vexations, assaults, and iniquities, the people began to realize that these men could not in truth have descended from the heavens. Some of them started to conceal what food they had, and others decided to send their women and children into hiding. Yet others took to the hills to get away from the brutal and ruthless cruelty that was being inflicted on them. The Christians punched them, boxed their ears, and flogged them in order to track down the local leaders, and the whole shameful process came to a head when one European commander raped the wife of a paramount chief of the entire island. It was then that the locals began to think up ways of driving the Europeans out of their lands and to take up arms against them. Their weapons, however, were flimsy and ineffective in both attack and defense. Indeed, war in the Americas was no more deadly than our jousting or the many European children's games. And with their horses and swords and lances, the Spaniards easily fended them off, killing them and committing all kind of atrocities against them. They forced their way into native settlements, slaughtering everyone they found there, including small children, old men, pregnant women, and even women who had just given birth. They hacked them to pieces, slicing open their bellies with their swords as though they were so many sheep herded into a pen. They even laid wagers on whether they could manage to slice a man in two with a stroke, or cut an individual's head from his body, or disembowel him with a single blow of their axes. They grabbed suckling infants from their feet, ripping them from their mothers' breasts, dashed them headlong against rocks. Others, laughing and joking all the while, threw them over their shoulders into a river, shouting, "Wriggle, you little perisher!" They slaughtered anyone and everyone in their path, and on occasion running through a mother and her baby with a single thrust of their swords. They spared no one, erecting especially wide gibbets on which they could string their victims up with their feet just off the ground and then burn them alive, 13 at a time, in honor of our Savior and the 12 apostles, or tie dry straw to their bodies and set fire to it. Some they chose to keep alive and simply cut their wrists, leaving their hands dangling, saying to them, "Take this letter," meaning that their sorry condition would act as a warning to those hiding in the hills. The way they normally dealt with native leaders and nobles was to tie them to a kind of griddle consisting of sticks nesting on pitchforks driven into the ground, and then grill them over a slow fire. With the result that they howled in agony and despaired as they died a lingering death. It once happened that I myself witnessed the grilling of 4 or 5 local leaders in this fashion, and I believe that they had set up 2 or 3 pairs of grills alongside so they might process their victims at the same time. When the poor creature's howls came between the Spanish commander and his sleep, he gave orders that the prisoners were to be throttled. But the man in charge of the execution detail, who was more bloodthirsty than the average common hangman, I know his identity and even met some relatives of his in Seville, was loath to cut short his private entertainment by throttling them, and so he personally went round ramming wooden bungs into their mouths to stop them making such a racket, and deliberately stoked the fire so that they would take just as long to die as he himself chose. I saw all these things for myself and many others besides, and since all those who could do so took to the hills and mountains in order to escape the clutches of these merciless and inhuman butchers, these mortal enemies of humankind trained hunting dogs to track them down, wild dogs who would savage a native to death as soon as look at him, tearing him to shreds and devouring his flesh as though he were a pig. These dogs wrought havoc among the natives and were responsible for much carnage. And when, as happened on the odd occasion, the locals did kill a European, as given the enormity of the crimes committed against them, they were, all injustice, fully entitled to. The Spanish came to the unofficial agreement among themselves that for every one European killed, 100 natives would be executed. And again, I'm just going to leave that there. I don't really think I need to explain why this is all horrific. Oh, and here's the source that I got this information from. And here is sort of a depiction of some of the things both de Quino and Las Casas described. And here's one as well. Now, this brings us to our next section, the military of the Spanish Empire. So, for one thing, for much of its history, the Spanish Empire did not have a professional army. Most of its army consisted of peasant levies who were conscripted into the Spanish army only in times of war. Other parts of the Spanish army consisted of knights and nobles who acted as cavalry. Ranks within the Spanish armies, once they were mobilized, included in descending order of status. Uh, Capitan General, Captain General, Coronel or Colonel, Capitan, Captain, uh, Teniente, Lieutenant, Sargento, Sergeant, Cabo, Corporal, Infantes, or Peones, they are called both, regular foot soldiers. And then there were also specialized roles, such as ballesteros and lanceros, crossbowmen and lancers, who also existed. Initially, the Spanish cavalry acted as shock troops similar to other nightly orders in Europe, but later they would adopt hit and run tactics similar to the cavalry of Muslim kingdoms, mobile Muslim bandit groups in the Iberian Peninsula, and Muslim mercenaries fighting in the armies of Christian kingdoms in the Iberian Peninsula. Hit and run tactics were also incorporated into Spanish naval warfare. Uh, Also, a common tactic in medieval and early modern European warfare was taking of captives, especially nobles and rulers, and ransoming them for money or land. With the adoption of gunpowder weapons, guns such as the arquebus and cannons became more common in the Spanish army. However, crossbows were still more common than firearms in the Spanish army until the late 1500s and the 1600s. War dogs, such as mastiffs and Spanish bulldogs, were used against barely armored troops, and they were trained to kill and disembowel. Spies were used to gather information on enemy forces and fortifications, to assassinate political enemies, intercept and analyze mail, and leverage information from border communities. Throughout the high and late medieval periods of Europe between 1000 and 1500 CE, fortifications such as castles unsurprisingly, were used by armies in times of war and peace. Later in the early modern period between 1500 and the 1780s CE, star forts and bastions designed to maximize the effectiveness of gunpowder weapons began to be used. These used protected blind spots called dead zones to create deadly crossfire areas where gunpowder weapons from multiple sides could be fired at a besieging enemy. The walls of the fort were sloped to prevent direct arquebus fire, and topped with earthen slopes to absorb the energy of cannon fire. And often a series of circular ditches were designed to slow enemy assaults were surrounding these star forts. And then later, Allied Native American soldiers would make up the bulk of the Spanish army in the Americas, with these allies being used to great effect. And here's all the sources I got this information from. And here are some examples of Spanish infantrymen and arquebusiers and such, and Spanish cavalry. Here are some of the generally type of swords that they would have used. This is one of the various types of spear or pike that the Spanish army would have used. Here's an example of an arquebus, and here's some Spanish crossbows. And here's an example of a Spanish cannon that was actually found recently in, I want to say Arizona or Colorado. It's connected to the Coronado expedition into the southwest of the United States. Pretty cool. But this is generally what the cannons, smaller cannons that weren't, mounted on ships, would have looked like. This is generally what the type of armor that would have been worn by the Spanish army, as armor in all European armies was worn right up until the late 1600s, early 1700s. And here's what a typical shield that a Spanish infantryman or even cavalryman would have used. And then here's some of the dogs that they would have used in battle, such as the Spanish Mastiff and Spanish Bulldog. And here's one of the various types of ships that the Spanish would have used. These include things like brigantines and caravels. And here is an example of a Spanish star fort. As you can see, where it gets its name, it's literally shaped like a star. And these little areas right here, these are what would have been the dead zones. As you can see, there's multiple areas for people to just shoot down at people trying to storm the fort. All right, so now we need to discuss something. So as we discussed human sacrifice and its connection to the Triple Alliance and Mesoamerica as a whole. But we can't discuss that and not discuss very similar things that happened in Europe through much of the High Medieval and early modern periods, and that is European inquisitions and witch hunts. So, from the High Medieval period through the early modern periods, specifically starting between in 1199 CE and going into the 1600s CE of Europe, judicial proceedings blended secular and religious law. Within these proceedings, torture was used to obtain confessions for crimes, employing methods such as waterboarding, tying an individual to a rack and turning a crank to slowly pull the individual's limbs apart, using weights to dislocate limbs, placing heavy stones on a person's chest until they confess or die, etc. Punishments for crimes included boiling alive, using a will to break a person's spine, burning at the stake, which is the most famous one, among other things. Among the most famous examples of the use of torture in medieval and early modern European judicial proceedings are the various inquisitions, such as the Spanish, French, and Templar Inquisitions. Now, it must be noted that the casualties of the various inquisitions are greatly exaggerated by popular media, with the total executions for the Spanish Inquisition, which was the worst one, only resulting in roughly 3 to 5,000 executions in its entire duration. And other inquisitions have far less executions. However, the small number of deaths does not discount the brutality of the torture used in Inquisition proceedings. Furthermore, just as famous as the Inquisitions are the various witch hunts of early modern Europe, where these hunts, for one, used many of the same torture methods and punishments of the medieval judicial proceedings and the contemporary Inquisitions. However, in contrast to the Inquisitions, the witch hunts resulted in the executions of between 40,000 and 60,000 individuals accused of witchcraft between 1400 and 1775 CE. These numbers do not include, of course, unofficial lynchings of accused witches or the executions of individuals charged with other crimes or deaths resulting from enslavement, all of which are also things that we've already mentioned. So yeah, for one thing, here's the sources I got this information from. But I want to point this out to say that, like, yes, not necessarily. You might notice that these numbers, maybe are not necessarily as high as, say, the highest amount of people that could have been sacrificed in the Triple Alliance over the course of its history, with 20,000 being the highest. But again, for one thing, is more than likely, much lower than that. But for another thing, uh, as we also discussed, the Triple Alliance had had a much higher population. After all, its capital, Tenochtitlan, um, had a higher population than cities like Toledo and Madrid in Spain combined. So one would expect the number of deaths would be a little higher uh, in the Triple Alliance than in Europe. Uh, but even that being said, this is not the oppression Olympics. This is not Olympics to see who is worse, any less or more worse. That's not the point. My whole point in bringing this up is to show that uh, that the European nations were doing very similar things at a very similar scale to the human sacrifice conducted in the Aztec Triple Alliance. Very much so, um, which you can see in these sources here in this information I've just discussed. All right, now this brings us to our next section: early Spanish expeditions to mainland Mexico. So, in 1517 CE, upon hearing rumors of lands to the north and west of the Caribbean from Native American and Spanish sailors, the Spanish governor of Cuba, Diego Velasquez de Cuellar, um, and I'm sorry if I butchered that, would commission Francisco Hernandez de Cordoba to lead an expedition to find this land. The Cordoba expedition would explore the Yucatan Peninsula and would encounter the Maya peoples, with this happening between March 1st and April 30th, 1517 CE. And then in April 1517 CE, after a mix of peaceful and violent encounters with Maya communities and the capturing of Maya prisoners, the Cordoba expedition would be ambushed by a large Campeche Maya force, and 55 men, including Cordoba, would be killed. Then the remnants of the Cordoba expedition would return to Cuba, ending the expedition in failure on April 30th, 1517 CE. Velasquez would then commission a second expedition under the command of his nephew Juan de Grijalva. The Grijalva expedition would be more successful, exploring the Yucatan and the Mexican coastline, trading with Native American communities, and eventually returning to Cuba with goods valued at 20,000 Spanish crowns. However, Velasquez would view this profit as insufficient and would see the expedition as a failure, with this expedition happening between January and October of 1518 CE. Then, on October 23rd, 1518 CE, Velasquez would commission a third expedition under the command of Fernando, also known as Hernando Cortés de Monroy y Pizarro Altamirano, most famously known as Hernán Cortés. Um, One thing I do want to point out that Fernando is, I believe Fernando and Hernando are both correct. this is just a different Spanish naming conditions um, based on region, I believe, but they both mean roughly Hernando. Um, and this is generally how Cortez would have referred to himself, either as Fernando or Hernando. However, as he is most famously known as Hernan, uh, he will be for through the rest of the video either be referred to as Cortez or Hernan Cortez. Which now brings us to the next section, the Cortez Expedition. So Cortez would gather between 500 and 600 volunteers for the expedition, including a doctor, several carpenters, at least 8 women, a few hundred Arawak Native Americans from Cuba, and some Africans, both free and enslaved. As with other Spanish expeditions, including the two we just mentioned, and the expeditions to the Caribbean, anyone joining Cortez willing to make a financial contribution could potentially gain more wealth and power. For example, men who brought horses called caballeros received 2 shares of spoils, one for military service and another because of the horse. Now, at the last minute, due to an old argument between the two, Velasquez would change his mind and would revoke Cortez's charter. Cortez would ignore the order, and in an open act of mutiny, would go anyway on February 1519 CE. The Cortez expedition would stop first on the island of Cozumel, an attempt to convert the Maya people there with mixed results. While there, he would encounter Spanish survivors of earlier expeditions, including Franciscan missionary Jerónimo de Aguilar and Spanish sailor Gonzalo Guerrero. As both then were able to speak Maya and other Mesoamerican languages, Cortez would attempt to recruit them both as interpreters. However, only Aguilar agreed, as Guerrero had completely assimilated into Maya culture and chose to remain behind. Later, Guerrero was a fierce opponent of Spanish colonization and likely died in battle against the Spanish. And this happened in February of 1519 CE. Then the Cortes expedition would land near the Chontal Maya city of Potochan in modern day Veracruz, Mexico. Um, and despite lacking any military experience, Cortes was able to utilize his cavalry and artillery to defeat the Chontal Maya in multiple battles. And this was largely due to the fact that the cavalry was effective on the flat terrain of the coast. And these battles would happen in March of 1519 CE. After defeating the Chontal Maya, Cortez would then recruit Malintzin, a Nahua woman from the city of Olutla, who had been sold into enslavement to the Chontal Maya. Able to speak Nahuatl, Cortez viewed her as his most important interpreter for the region. Furthermore, her city of origin was a rival of the Triple Alliance, making the eventual war with the Triple Alliance beneficial to her. And this is something I want to highlight here, and I'll highlight it again in a little bit, is far too often the role of Native Americans on the Spanish side in the Aztec-Spanish War is overlooked. Um, but it's important, that it's important to note that despite that, Native Americans very much had on the Spanish side, in many ways, if they were allies, had agency, and in many ways they were um, the ones who sort of steered the ship. I mean, Cortez certainly had a lot of control as well, but so did Native American individuals such as Malintzin and later other Native American allies. Then, in July 1519 CE, Cortez would seize control of the region of Veracruz and declare himself governor of the region. Meanwhile, informed of the Spanish by spies and merchants, Moctezuma II, the Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan, would dispatch emissaries to the Cortez expedition with gifts. An experienced military commander, Moctezuma II, intended to gauge the strength of the Spanish and whether they would make valuable assets in the Triple Alliance. Cortez would attempt and fail to threaten the emissaries, and this would happen in April of 1519 CE. And I want to point this out here. This is a codice showing all the war honors that Moctezuma II gained throughout his life. Uh, After this, the Cortez expedition would prepare to march toward Tenochtitlan. Before this, Cortez would dismantle his ships. Now, popular belief would have you believe that he either burned or sank his ships in defiant response to a mutiny among his men. However, despite this, in reality, Cortez and his captains realized the hulls of the ships were rotting, and this led them to beach and dismantle the ships in order to recover the sails, rigging, cables, cordage, tackle nails, and other metal fittings from the ships for later use in other ships. The Cortez expedition would then march toward Tenochtitlan with an additional 200 Native American allies from the city of Cimpaula. Um, while impossible to know for certain, historians acknowledge that the expedition was probably monitored the whole way by small contingents of the Triple Alliance's army. With this march happening or beginning on August 19 CE. The Cortez expedition would eventually arrive in the Tlaxcalan state and would begin to attack and burn tributary villages and towns of the Tlaxcalan state. In response, the Tlaxcalan army and armies from their tributary states would engage the expedition in 3 battles and surround them. Realizing his expedition faced annihilation at the hands of the far more powerful Tlaxcalan army, Cortez would attempt to persuade Xicotencat II, the Tlaxcalan war leader, to ally with him against the Triple Alliance. Seeing an opportunity to inflict a significant defeat on the Triple Alliance, Xicotencat II would agree. From this point forward, the Tlaxcalan state and the Cortez expedition were equal partners. And this would happen between September and October 1519 CE. The Cortez expedition, along with roughly 6,000 Tlaxcalan warriors, would depart the Tlaxcalan state. The Tlaxcalan warriors would deceive the expedition into marching south toward the Triple Alliance tributary city of Cholula by stating that it was the only city nearby with supplies. In reality, the Tlaxcalan warriors actually wanted to inflict a defeat on Cholula and by proxy a defeat on the Triple Alliance. For his part, Moctezuma II used this as an opportunity to test the abilities of the Cortez expedition, knowing that whether or not Cholula won, the Cortez expedition would be weakened in some way. Then the Cortez expedition and the Tlaxcalan warriors would massacre roughly 6,000 Cholulan citizens on October 18th, 1519 CE. Then in November of 1519 CE, the Cortez expedition and the Tlaxcalan warriors would arrive in Tenochtitlan and were welcomed by Moctezuma II, who gave gifts of gold and other treasures. Now, despite popular belief, the Cortez expedition did not take Moctezuma II hostage. In reality, Moctezuma II contained the Cortez expedition in Tenochtitlan until the war season, from December to April, when he could amass the full might of his army and either use the Cortez expedition to attack rival states such as the Purépecha state or wipe out the expedition completely. Now, another important thing to point out is, contrary to popular belief, Moctezuma II and the Triple Alliance did not associate Cortez with the deity Quetzalcoatl. For one thing, he's not really a deity, but that's a complex subject that we don't have time to discuss in this video. But it's also important to note this claim only appears in sources after the 1540s and 1550 CE. In reality, the members of the Cortez expedition were called Castilteca, or Men of Castile, indicating that Moctezuma II and the Triple Alliance saw the members of the Cortez expedition as simply human beings from another city or nation. Furthermore, Cortez never states in any of his letters that Moctezuma II called him Quetzalcoatl. Instead, Cortez claims that Moctezuma believed that Cortez and the expedition were the descendants of the nations original inhabitants returning to claim the land. And even this account is obviously biased to please the King of Spain, for one thing, because we don't have the actual any accounts from Moctezuma II himself. And the Spanish are notoriously unreliable because they embellished their accounts a lot to gain favor from the Spanish king. But regardless of bias, Quetzalcoatl is mentioned nowhere in the letters. In fact, in his second letter to King Charles V of Spain on October 30th, 1520 CE, Cortés states that, quote, after he had given them to me, and he sat down on another platform, which they immediately prepared near the one where I was seated, and being seated, he spoke in the following manner. We have known for a long time from the chronicles of our forefathers that neither I nor those who inhabit this country are descendants from the aborigines of it, but from strangers who came to it from very distant parts. We also hold that our race was brought to these parts by a lord, whose vassal they were, who returned to his native country. After a long time he came back, but it was so long, and that those who remained here were married with the native women of the country, and had many descendants, and had built many towns where they were living. When therefore he wished to take them away with him, they would not go, nor still less receive him as their ruler. So he departed. And we have always held that those who descended from him would come to subjugate this country, and us as his vassals, and according to the direction from the king which you say you come, which is where the sun rises, from what you tell of us of your great lord or king who has sent you here, we believe and hold certain that he is our rightful sovereign, especially as you tell us that since many we believe and hold for certain that he is uh yeah especially as you tell us since many days he has had news of us. Apologies. Hence, you may be sure, and that we shall obey you and hold you as the representative of this great Lord, whom you speak, and and that in this there will be no lack of deception, and throughout the whole country you may command at your will. I speak of what I possess in my dominions, because you will be obeyed and recognized, and all we possess is at your disposal, since you are the rightful are you are in your rightful place and in your own homes. Rejoice and rest, free from all the trouble of the journey and wars which you have had. For I am well aware of all that has happened to you between Puntunchan here, and I know very well that the people of Simpawal and Teshkalteka have told you many evil things respecting me. Do you believe more than you see with your own eyes, especially from those who are my enemies, were my vassals, yet rebelled against me on your coming, as they say? In order to help you, I know they have told you also that I have houses with walls of gold, and that the furniture of my halls and other things of my service were also of gold, and that I am or make myself a god, and many other things. The houses you have seen are of lime and stone and earth. And then he held up his robes, and showing me his body, he said to me, look at me, see that I am flesh and bones, the same as you, everybody, and that I am mortal and tangible. And touching his arms and body with his hands, look how they have lied to you. It is true indeed that I have some things of gold, which have been left to me by my forefathers. All that I possess you may have, wherever you wish. I shall now go to your houses where I have, but you will be provided here with everything necessary for you and your people, and you shall suffer no annoyance, for you are in your own house and country. I answered to all he said, certifying that which seemed to be suitable, especially in confirming his belief that it was your majesty whom they were expecting. After this he took his leave, and when he had gone, we were all well provided with chickens, bread, and fruits, and other necessities, especially such as were required for the cements of our quarters. Thus I passed 6 days or sorry, for the sense of our quarters. Thus I passed 6 days well provided with everything necessary and visited by many lords. I have already mentioned at the beginning, most Catholic lord, that when I started from the city of Veracruz in search of his lord Montezuma, I left there 150 men to build that fort which I had begun. And I likewise stated that I had left many villages and forts in the neighborhood of that town under the royal dominion of your highness, and the natives as very loyal vassals of your majesty. So, for one thing, here's the source that I got this information from. So, as you can see, for one thing, um, Cortez is very much exaggerating things, very obviously exaggerating things, and talking up his experience with Moctezuma II to try to get essentially more honors and more loot and money from the King of Spain. But also, you can see here that one Moctezuma II in no way called him a deity. He referred to, or the Spanish a deity. He referred to them essentially as the original inhabitants, as I talked about, of the land who were now returning. He still clearly viewed them as human. Um, if this is indeed the conversation that happened, because again, it's highly biased, and who knows whether or not Cortez was telling the truth. Then in April of 1520 CE, Cortez's political rival Panfilo de Narvaez was sent by Governor Velasquez to capture or kill Cortez. In response, Cortez took roughly 200 Spanish and 200 Tlaxcalan warriors to intercept Narvaez. Cortez would leave Pedro de Alvarado in charge of the expedition, which now brings us to our next section, the Aztec-Spanish War. So on May 22nd, 1520 CE, Moctezuma II and the priests of Tenochtitlan would conduct the celebration of Toshkat, a festival in honor of Tezcatlipoca, one of the main gods of the Mexica. After the festivities started, Alvarado interrupted the celebration and began killing all of the warriors and noblemen who were celebrating inside the Great Temple. The Spanish account claims that a rebellion against the Spanish was occurring, while the Nahua account claims that the Spanish wanted to take take the gold ornaments of the priests, and both accounts state that the warriors and priests were unarmed. Shortly after this, on May 27th, 1520 CE, Cortez would defeat the Narvaez expedition at the Battle of Cimpaola, and Cortez would capture Narvaez and absorb Narvaez's force into his own and would gather several more Tlaxcalan warriors. Upon his return to Tenochtitlan, Cortez was angered at Alvarado for the massacre at the temple, and shortly after this, the warriors of Tenochtitlan would retaliate by launching an attack on the Cortez expedition and the Tlaxcalan warriors, forcing them to fortify themselves in the Spanish compound of Tenochtitlan. In the process, Cortez would enact the very common European tactic of taking a ruler hostage, taking Moctezuma II hostage, and tried to force him to surrender, but then murdered him when he refused, and later tried to blame the warriors of the Triple Alliance and Tenochtitlan for the murder of Moctezuma II. All this would happen between June and July of 1520 CE. This time, the Cortez expedition and the Tlaxcalan warriors were unable to leave the Spanish compound without being attacked by the warriors of Tenochtitlan. But the warriors of Tenochtitlan were unable to storm the compound, which made the siege of the Spanish compound a stalemate. After a month, the Cortez expedition and the Tlaxcalan warriors would attempt to flee during the night with as much gold as they could carry. However, they were quickly attacked by the warriors of Tenochtitlan, with this happening on July 30th of 1520 CE. The warriors of Tenochtitlan would kill between 800 and 1,200 Spanish and roughly 4,000 Tlaxcalan warriors. The Cortez expedition and the Tlaxcalan warriors barely escaped Tenochtitlan without being annihilated. The expedition and the Tlaxcalan warriors were only able to survive thanks to the reinforcements brought by Cortez. This event is memorialized by the Spanish as La Noche Triste, or the Night of Sorrows, which occurred between June 30th and July 1st, 1520 CE. Bernal Diaz recounts the events of La Noche Triste in his True History of the Conquest of New Spain, stating that, quote, after we had learnt the plans that Cortes had made about the way in which we were to escape that night and get to the bridges, so it was somewhat dark and cloudy and rainy, we began before midnight to bring along the bridge, and the baggage and the horses and mare began their march, and the Tlaxcalans who were laden with gold. Then the bridge was quickly put in place, and Cortez and the others of whom he took with him in the first detachment, and many of the horsemen crossed over it. While this was happening, the voices and trumpets, cries, and whistles of the Mexicans began to sound, and they called out in their language to the people of Lolcoc, come out at once with your canoes, for the Teoles are leaving. Cut them off so that not one of them may be left alive. When I least expected, we saw many squadrons of warriors bearing down on us, and the lake so crowded with canoes that we could not defend ourselves. Many of our soldiers had already crossed the bridge. While we were in position, a great multitude of Mexicans charged down on us with the intention of removing the bridge and wounding and killing our men who were unable to assist each other. As misfortune is perverse at such times, one mischance followed another. As it was raining, two of the horses slipped and fell in the lake. When I and others of Cortez's company saw that, we got safely to the other side of the bridge. So many warriors charged on us that despite all our good fighting, no further use could be made of the bridge, so that the passage or water opening was soon filled with dead horses, Indian men, women, servants, baggage, and boxes. Fearing that they would not fail to kill us, we thrust ourselves along the causeway, and we met many squadrons armed with long lances awaiting for us. And they used abusive words to us, and among them they cried, "Oh, villains, are you still alive?" With the cuts and thrusts we gave them, we got through, although they wounded six of these who were going along with me. Then, if there was some sort of plan such as we had agreed upon, it was an accursed one, for Cortez and the captains and soldiers who passed first on horseback so as to save themselves and reach dry land and make sure their lives spurred along the causeway, and they did not fail to obtain their object. And the horses with the gold, and the Tlaxcalans also got out safely. I assert that if we had waited, the horsemen and the soldiers, one for the other, at the bridges, we should have all been put an end to. Not one of us would have been left alive. The reason was this, that we went along the causeway charging the Mexican squadrons. On one side of us was water, and the other side Aztecas. The lake was full of canoes, so that we could do nothing. Moreover, the muskets and crossbows were all left behind at the bridge. As it was night time, what could we clo behind what we accomplished? Which was to charge and give some sword thrusts to those who tried to lay hands on us, and to march uh, and get ahead so as to get off the causeway. Had it been in the daytime, it would have been far worse, and we escaped. Did so only by the grace of God. To one who saw the host of warriors who fell on us that night, and the canoes full of them coming along to carry off our soldiers, it was terrifying. So we went ahead along the causeway in order to get to the town of Tacuba, where Cortez was already stationed with all the captains, Gonzalo Sandoval, Cristobal de Olid, and others of those horsemen who had gone ahead were carrying out. Senor Captain, let us halt, for they say that we are fleecing and leaving them to die at the bridges. Let us go back and help them if any of them survive. But no one came out or escaped. And not one of them came out or escaped. Cortez's reply was that it was a miracle that any of us escaped. However, he promptly went back with the horsemen and soldiers who were unwounded, but they did not march far, for Pedro de Alvarado soon met them, badly wounded, and holding a spear in his hand, and on foot for they, the enemy, had already killed his sorrel mare, and he brought with him 4 soldiers as badly wounded as he was himself, and 8 Tlaxcalans, all of them with blood flowing from many wounds. While Cortez was on the causeway with the rest of the captains, we repaired to the courtyard in Tacuba. Many squadrons had already arrived from Mexico, shouting out orders to Tacuba and the other town named Azcapotzalco, and they began to hurl darts and stone arrows and attack with their long lances. And we made some charges, and both attacked them and defended ourselves. Let us go back to Pedro Alvarado. When Cortez and the other captains met him in that way and saw no more soldiers were coming along the causeway, tears sprang into his eyes. Pedro Alvarado said that Juan Velasquez de Leon lay dead with many other gentlemen of our own company, and that Narvaez, and that more than 80 of them were at the bridge, that he and the 4 soldiers whom he brought with him after their horses had been killed, crossed the bridge in great peril over the dead bodies, horses, and boxes with which that passage at the bridge was choked. Moreover, he said that all the bridges and causeways were crowded with warriors. At the Bridge of Sorrow, which they afterwards called Alvarado's Leap, I assert that at the time not a single soldier stopped to see if he leaped much or little, for we could hardly save our own lives, as we were in great danger of death on account of the multitude of Mexicans charging down on us. All that Gamora says on this matter is nonsense, for as is his wishing to leap and hold himself up with a lance, the water was very deep, and he could not have touched the ground with it. In addition to this, the bridge and the opening was very wide and high. He would not have been able to save himself had he been ever so much more active, neither on his lance nor in any other way. And one can clearly see that now, for the water so deep at that time, the walls were so high where the beams of the bridge were placed, and that the opening was so wide. I never heard of the sleep of Alvarado until Mexico was captured, and it was in some satirical verses made by a certain Gonzalo de Ocampo, which as they were somewhat nasty, I will not fully quote here, except that he says, shouldest remember the leap that thou tookest from the bridge," and I will not dwell on the subject. And here's the source that I got this information from. But as you can see from this excerpt, the Cortez expedition was almost entirely wiped out, and the Tlaxcalan allies were almost entirely wiped out by the army of Tenochtitlan and the Aztec Triple Alliance. As they fled from Tenochtitlan, the warriors of Tenochtitlan would pursue the Cortez expedition and Tlaxcalan warriors to the plain of Atumba, where they nearly overwhelmed the Cortez expedition and Tlaxcalan warriors. However, after the Spanish cavalry killed the commander of the Tenochtitlan warriors, the Tenochtitlan warriors would retreat to Tenochtitlan, which would allow the Cortez expedition and Tlaxcalan warriors to retreat to Tlaxcala, with this happening on July 7th, 1520 CE. While in Tlaxcala, Cortez would recruit more reinforcements from Cuba, swelling his expedition to between 900 and 1,300 Spanish infantry, 100 Spanish cavalry, 16 cannons, and 13 Spanish brigantine ships. Meanwhile, the Tlaxcalan leadership would form alliances with other Mesoamerican cities and states, even convincing the city of Texcoco itself to defect from the Triple Alliance. This would weaken the military power of the Triple Alliance and would allow the combined Native American forces allied with Cortez's expedition to swell to between 50,000 and 100,000 warriors. Some historians refer to the alliance of the Tlaxcalan state, the city of Texcoco, and the Cortez expedition as the Tlaxcalan Triple Alliance, with all this happening between July 1520 and May 1521 CE. And here is some examples. This is a Texcoco captain. This is a Tlaxcalan captain, And this is a Tlaxcalan porter, and here are some of the reinforcements joining Cortez's expedition. Meanwhile, in Tenochtitlan and Mesoamerica, a disease would begin to spread, most likely smallpox. The disease would result in the death of nearly 50% of Tenochtitlan's population and between 5 and 8 million people in Mesoamerica as a whole, with this epidemic happening between October and December of 1520 CE. One citizen of Tenochtitlan recounts the devastation of the plague, stating that, quote, a great plague broke out here in Tenochtitlan, striking everywhere in the city and killing a vast number of people. Sores erupted from on our faces, our breasts, and our bellies. We were covered with agonizing sores from head to foot. The illness was so dreadful that no one could walk or move. The sick were so utterly helpless that they could only lie on their beds like corpses, unable to move their limbs or even their heads. They could not lie face down or roll on one side or the other. If they did not move their bodies, they screamed with pain. A great many died from this plague, and many others died of hunger. They could not get up to search for food, and everyone else was too sick to care for them, so they starved to death in their beds. By the time the danger was recognized, the plague was so well established that nothing could halt it. Here's the source that I got this information from. As you can see, the what is often called the Great Plague of Tenochtitlan absolutely devastated the Aztec Triple Alliance and Mesoamerican society as a whole. Then, on February 1521 CE, Cuauhtemoc, the cousin of Moctezuma II, would become the Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan and would send multiple armies to destroy the Cortes expedition and the Tlaxcalan army. However, each army was defeated by Tlaxcala's Native American alliance. In response, Cuauhtemoc would fortify the remainder of his army in Tenochtitlan, with all these events happening between February and May of 1521 CE. Which now brings us to our next section, the Siege of Tenochtitlan. So the Cortes expedition and the combined Native American allies would begin to lay siege to Tenochtitlan on May 26, 1521 CE. In the initial stages of the siege, the Cortes expedition and the combined Native American allies would dismantle and reconstruct their Spanish brigantine ships on Lake Texcoco to allow the Spanish cannons to get close enough to get close enough to Tenochtitlan to bombard it. Meanwhile, the warriors of the Aztec Triple Alliance were able to defeat the Cortes expedition and the combined Native American allies in multiple early battles of the siege, such as the Battle of Tlacopan. However, the warriors of the Aztec Triple Alliance were also defeated in the first battle on the lake, with these all happening between May 26th and June 30th, 1521 CE. Now, that being said, the army of the Aztec Triple Alliance was also able to use canoes to successfully ambush the Spanish brigantine ships repeatedly, and the Spanish forces were ineffective on Tenochtitlan's causeways. Both of these would allow the army of the Aztec Triple Alliance to repeatedly repulse the Cortes expedition and the combined Native American allies. Frustrated by the repeated failures of the siege, Cortes would then launch a massive assault on Tenochtitlan. However, Cortes was again repulsed, with the Cortes expedition and the combined Native American allies actually suffering more casualties than at La Noche Triste. This event would become known as the Battle of Coahuacatanco, happening on June 30th, 1521 CE. Despite their repeated victories, the Aztec Triple Alliance in Tenochtitlan would gradually run out of food, and the Cortes expedition and the combined Native American allies were able to gradually take more and more of the city. Now, it's important to note this was still a slog, and the fighting was heavy, and they did lose a lot of battles. But eventually, the warriors of the Aztec Triple Alliance were defeated in a last stand, but not before inflicting heavy casualties on the Cortes expedition and the combined Native American allies. And eventually, Cuauhtemoc would surrender to save his people. which would end the siege of Tenochtitlan in a victory for the Cortés Expedition and the combined Native American allies on August 13th, 1521 CE. Which now brings us to our last section, the aftermath of the Aztec-Spanish War. So, for one thing, in 1525 CE, Cuauhtemoc would be tortured and killed. Then, in August, at the same time this was all going on, Hernán Cortés would become the governor of New Spain multiple times from August 1521 to July 1526 CE, before eventually returning to Spain. Uh, Between 1521 and 1529 CE, Malintzin would continue to act as Cortez's preferred interpreter and eventually would have a son from him named Martin Cortez, with Martin largely believed to be among the first mestizo children, half Native American, half European children born in Mexico. Malintzin is believed to have died 8 years after the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1529 CE. Then, between 1521 and 1697 CE, the Spanish Empire would embark on a campaign of conquest against the Native American nations of Mesoamerica and the North American Southwest, which you can see here on this map here. Then the new Spanish province that once was the Aztec Empire, the Triple Alliance, the Aztec Triple Alliance, would be named Mexico after the word Mexico, the Nahuatl term for the heartland of the Triple Alliance. And between the 1500s and 1600s CE, the Spanish Empire would heavily utilize Native American slavery, which would result in the deaths of millions of Native Americans. And it's important to point out that Native American slavery was a key part of the Spanish encomienda system, which essentially was, on paper, the idea was that the settlers, white Europeans, would protect and care for and Christianize Native Americans. And Native Americans would work for a portion of their time for Spanish settlers, but in reality, Spanish settlers would force long labor, didn't pay Native American workers, and failed to protect Native American workers, and of course, seized Native American lands. And also, Native Americans often died from disease and harsh living and working conditions. So it was essentially slavery in all but name. Now, that being said, the Native American nations of Mesoamerica and the North American Southwest were never fully conquered, with multiple Native American rebellions against Spanish rule breaking out between 1550 and the 1700s CE, including the Chichimeca War between 1550 and 1590 CE, and the Teschalt Tez Eltal rebellion. I apologize for butchering that. By the Mayan community of the Chiapas region between 1712 and 1713 CE. Then, throughout this time period, especially in the modern era, Cuauhtemoc would become a symbol of indigenous resistance in Mexico. And finally, despite previous attempts by the Spanish Empire and continued attempts at cultural genocide by the United Mexican States, Native American groups in Mexico, such as the Nahua and the Mixtec, among others, continue to maintain and revive their traditional cultures. So with that, that brings an end to our video on the Aztec-Spanish War. I hope everyone watching learned a lot. I know there's a lot of mythology and misinformation surrounding this subject, and really the history of the Americas as a whole. So I really hope that this video helped sort of cut through the mythology and the misinformation And I hope that you take the information you learned from this video and take it to educate other people on the subject. And of course, as always, I apologize, as I said a few times in the video, I apologize for butchering indigenous languages. Feel free to correct me on these things, among other things. If you want to see me discuss any of the other things in the video in greater detail in later videos, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I hope you all have a good day.